Well, welcome to another walk and talk. Lovely to be out and about again. Beautiful sunshine. I was talking to one of our neighbours earlier this morning. They said, "Isn't this weather lovely?" And then they said, "Do you think this is our summer? We're just going to have some slightly warmer, bright days and dry days in April, and then the rain and the gloom will settle in." And I said, "I hope not. It's possible. It's been England, but I hope not." And anyway, we are getting close to Easter, and I thought I'd just use this one to talk a bit about how we preach the resurrection, how we preach, whether that's on Easter Sunday or whether that's when we come to those Bible passages in Luke, Matthew, Mark. I don't know why I did it in that order, and John. I guess I went with Luke first because our church are also doing the preaching series in Luke. So if you're watching in from our church, we are going to get to the resurrection twice. We're going to do it at Easter, and then later in the year we're going to look at the resurrection as we get to Luke 24. Probably just in time for Christmas, which is great because we did the birth of Jesus in Luke just before Easter, so it will balance itself out. But anyway, whether it's a set piece for Easter or it's working through a book of the Bible and getting to the resurrection accounts, or it's a one-off evangelistic talk or a topical talk and you picking up on those events, how do you preach on the resurrection? And that's the live question for me. I'm actually going to be preaching on Easter Sunday this year. Really excited to be doing that. I love Easter. Easter's my favourite out of the festivals. I love Easter more than Christmas. And I'm not just saying that out of some kind of evangelical piety. I really do love the big, joyful celebration of Easter. That's what we're going to be going for at our church. Previous church, we used to go for it with balloons, with gifts of chocolate, and all that kind of thing. But you've sung some songs, hopefully some of those great classic Easter hymns like "From the Grave He Arose" and "Thine be the glory" and "Christ the Lord is risen today," that kind of thing. And then it's time to preach. How do you preach it? And I think our tendency, our temptation over much of my lifetime has been to treat it as a kind of apologetics event. And so our tendency is to treat it as a kind of a mystery to be solved, to be proven. And we dig out old books by lawyers like Val Grieve and Frank Morrison, Who Moved the Stone, and we set out to prove that Jesus really did rise from the grave, that it's not a hoax, that it's not a myth, but that this man Jesus really has conquered death. And we deal with all kinds of potential objections, that somebody stole the body, that the disciples were hallucinating, that Jesus hadn't really died on the cross. And that's where we focus. And at the end we conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. And we're also I think often not too sure where to take it. We've kind of proven to our satisfaction the historical truth, the reliability of the evidence that Jesus did rise from the dead. And then it's a kind of, okay, so now we've proved it, now you've got to believe it. Now you've got to become a Christian. Now, I remember doing that as a presentation. I was on a communications course at my old work, and we had to, at the end of the course, deliver a presentation, and that was what we were assessed on. And I remember as a young, I must have been about 20, 22, 23, I thought, I'm going to use this as an opportunity, bad mistake, to evangelise. I'm going to go through my classic university CU who moved the stone kind of gambit. And I remember doing that, thinking, I've nailed it. And it all fell kind of flat. I think that's one of the challenges with that. But here's the other thing. I'm not convinced that can you prove it actually happened is the big question that people have got. And certainly not the big question that people are going to have if they walk into church on Sunday, on Easter Sunday, or on whichever day you are preaching on the resurrection. And I'm picking up that I'm not the only one feeling this. I saw an article, someone the other day, about the way that the questions that people are asking about Easter and about the resurrection are changing. Now, I'm going to come back to what I think is the question, or I think it is the question that people are more likely to be asking, either later in this video or possibly in another video. But I wanted first of all to talk about why that's not the question we should be gearing up to answer. So really I'm going to first of all deal with how not to preach the resurrection, and I'm going to argue, don't put your focus on proving the truth of the resurrection. And the first thing to say is this, that actually I think we can cut through a lot of the debate and the discussion with one simple and important piece of evidence. And I'm very grateful to Tom Wright and his big book on the resurrection for this. And if you don't ever get to read his book, then here's the too long didn't read it. The people in Jesus' day were not expecting a physical resurrection from the dead. Remember that these are people who were quite happy with miracles, quite happy with the supernatural, believed that there was a God, but they weren't expecting one person to be raised from the dead. Why? Well, in terms of what most people expected, in terms of dominant worldviews, the view was that our biggest need was to escape from physical matter, that physical matter was considered impure, as not good, and so getting back to impersonal pure spirit was really where we needed to be. And so the driver was not to be raised again with bodies, and so no one in terms of sort of Greek and sort of pagan thought was expecting anyone to come back from the dead with a physical body, able to eat and drink and walk and talk and that kind of thing. They expected you to go into some kind of shady afterlife, and that was really itself a kind of a step staging post towards true spiritual freedom. Now, there was one group of people that expected resurrection, and that was, of course, the Jews, the very people that Jesus had come and been born amongst and lived amongst and worked amongst his own people. But they expected one general resurrection of all people from the dead at the end, when God ushered in his eternal eschatological kingdom. So they weren't expecting one person to be raised kind of ahead of time in the middle of history. And Tom Wright makes that point brilliantly. None of them were looking for one person to be raised. It wasn't on the agenda. And so that makes it highly unlikely that this thing was made up. But its surprisingness adds weight to its authenticity. And I might make a nod to that when I'm preaching on the resurrection. But like I said, that I'm primarily not going to be focusing on trying to prove that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, here's why. I want to think about the different types of people that will be in congregation at any time when I'm preaching, whether it's Easter Sunday or when we get to Luke 24. Here are the groups of people. First of all, you are going to have Christians who have already put their trust in Jesus. And assuming you're an evangelical church, and I'm not trying to do a resuscitation of a liberal church, then those people will know that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, there might be some people that are looking to find out, how do you answer those kinds of questions? That's when they're witnessing to people who are sceptical. But in terms of them being there on the day and them being fed with God's word, their biggest need is not for you to prove the resurrection. Who else might be there? Well, there might be people that have come from a sceptical background that wouldn't have necessarily been sure that they believed in miracles, would need some convincing on that kind of thing, would have questions about science and the truth of things. Now, we mustn't lose sight of them and the fact that that question, is it true, did it really happen, may still be real for them on the day as they come and join in. But my point would be this: if they've come to church as opposed to a Christianity Explored or an Alpha Course or a special evangelistic event, they have come at least willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. They've at least come accepting the possibility that this is true. But here's the thing. The fact that they've come and they're willing to be open to the possibility of Jesus rising from the dead also would suggest to me that there are more important questions, the questions we're going to come to, before the is it true? Because, you know, there are all sorts of things that people debate and talk about. Is this thing true or not? And most of us don't give the time of day to them beyond maybe dropping in a Facebook comment with our opinion. We're only going to get up out of our beds on a Sunday morning and go to a venue with some friends or with some strangers in response to an invite because there's the possibility that this thing matters. And so before I'm bothered about whether or not it's true, I want to get a sense of, does it really matter? Is it really that important? Here are some other people that might be in your congregation on Sunday. You may have other people, they are visitors, they are people from the estate around you. And what I think we have found as we spend time with people, as we've actually listened to people, is that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the kind of the secular, supposedly intellectual world and a secular, God-denying culture that rejects, resists, sees as nonsense any idea of the supernatural. But actually, most people, although they may not believe in the gospel, may not believe in the God of Christianity, that doesn't mean to say that they don't believe anything, in anything. In fact, many years ago, one author pointed out that when you stop believing in God, you don't end up believing in nothing, you believe in anything at all. And that's because I think when you look at people's lives and you talk to people, they are alert, they are aware that there is something more than this. And apparently we can look at what the Bible says, that God has set eternity in the hearts of man. Partly I think it is just because all sorts of weird and unexplained things do happen to people. And so there's a hunger for, and sometimes a fear of, that something more. And in that sense, those people need to have an answer to a different question, to is it true? Yeah, I've got any problem with is it true? What they want to know is it good or is it bad? Is this something I can embrace or something I should run away from? Is it dangerous? There will be other people there, people from other religious backgrounds, again, unlikely to have any questions about the possibility that the resurrection is real and true. But their questions are more likely to be, why Jesus? Why Jesus out of all of the potential people, out of all the potential beings, out of all of the potential gods? Why would we be saying it's Jesus who is the one who is truly God and truly man, who truly died and rose again? And then there's a specific group of people that I hope we're engaging with, and I hope we're praying that we'll see coming and engaging with us, and that's Muslims. Now, their challenge is going to be slightly different again. Their challenge is going to be this. Why should we believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Not because we've got any problem with miracles and the supernatural, but because they don't believe that it was actually Jesus who died on the cross. And that's because there's this sort of very similar to some of the things that you get in some of the Gnostic Gospels. There's this idea that Jesus swapped with someone else, possibly Judas. The real Jesus was not actually truly human and therefore couldn't die on the cross. And that it would be repulsive the idea that one of the prophets would die like that. And so the story is being developed that Jesus managed to pull a trick, swap over, possibly with Judas. One of the Gnostic Gospels talks about the true Jesus sort of looking down at this corpse on the cross and laughing. How horrific and ugly that is compared to the truth of the gospel. But the Muslim is coming, and if they're coming because at this stage they've not got to that stage of saying, I'm willing to really put my trust in Jesus, and therefore I know that he was the one who died and he was the one who rose again. If they're coming maybe out of respect, out of curiosity to see how Christians celebrate, maybe because they're looking for an opportunity to later invite you back to an Ifka meal or something like that, and looking for reasons to sort of engage with you and challenge you, then their questions are going to be very different again. And whilst in that case they have questions about the truth of it, they're different to the sort that we're used to doing in our apologetics. But I would be inclined to say that for them, and for others that may have the is it true question, that those kinds of questions are best dealt with one-to-one, and with plenty of time and hospitality and food given to the conversation. But also, I think that even for those Muslims with those truth claim questions, I think we are still in that territory of saying there's a pressing question beforehand, which is similar to other faiths, why Jesus, and the why does it matter? Because the reason that Muslims don't believe in the resurrection, and why Islam doesn't want you to believe in the resurrection, is because they're saying we have a better hope, we have something that makes a difference, that we have the Quran, we have the pillars of Islam, and that is what is going to make a real difference in your life. So Jesus is secondary, an honoured prophet, but of course second to Muhammad. And so we probably want to first of all start with that question of why does Jesus matter? Why does it matter that he really did die on the cross and really did rise again? Why is the focus meant to be on him? Because actually, again, if you are someone who believes in the supernatural, if you have no problem with the possibility that God can do miracles and that God can heal and that God can raise to life, then you've probably got no problem with accepting that that is what happened with Jesus, if you can see that it is important for that to have happened with Jesus. So, as I said, I might come back to let me know if you want me to do this or not. I might do it anyway, it's nothing, no trouble, but it also helps to know if this is something that is of interest. But I might come back and talk a bit more about how I would preach it. But the main answer to the question, how do you preach the resurrection, is I want the focus to be on what difference does it make? Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why is it relevant? And in short, again, for those that are thinking, oh, don't do another video, Dave. I'm not going to watch it. But those that want the sort of the short answer, I would be putting my attention into showing the difference that it made to those early followers of Jesus, the difference it made to Mary Magdalene, that this lady at the tomb who's weeping, and then she is coming to grasp hold of her Lord and her Master. The difference it makes to Peter, the one who had denied Jesus but is running with John to the tomb. The difference it made to those other disciples who scattered away, but 50 days later will be boldly proclaiming their confidence in Jesus the Messiah. Well, drop a comment and let me know if this has been helpful or not. Any questions you've got, anything you'd like me to follow up on, let me know. Thanks.